Hi, my name is Ashlyn, and this presentation is on art therapy for the deaf and hearing impaired. While most people may assume that being deaf only means a loss of hearing, there is so much more. There is a deep culture and no exact definition of what defines a deaf person. The community of the deaf are close, and while they each go through different walks of life, they are usually tied closely together, although they can be often prejudiced towards one another that they feel are not deserving of the deaf culture. And this world of the deaf is very unique as well, which you'll find out why. In the United States, there are about 1 million functionally deaf people. There's about 35 million people of hard of hearing, and only 500,000 native ASL users. And while there are so many people that struggle with hard of hearing or deafness, there are very little people and therapies that include them. There is a wide variety from deaf to hearing impaired. There are those that are born deaf or become deaf before speech development. There are those after speech development or at an older age that lose their hearing. Hearing impaired is the same and can range in their level of hearing. Some are raised with parents that are also deaf or hearing impaired, and most are not, though. And some are the only ones that grew up in a hearing family. Some know sign language, some don't. There are a range of speech as well, from those that can fully verbalize and pronounce things just right to those who do not speak at all. Learning these differences can be important in therapy. The distance between these people often feel from the rest of the world can bring on depression, anxiety, and kids may often struggle to keep up in school and may be thought of as mentally retarded even. These extra struggles are important to acknowledge as well as their hearing loss. There are many struggles that the deaf and some hearing impaired people face every day. The first would be communication. The lack of communication between deaf people and hearing people are very little. There's such difficultness between them that miscommunications happen and a sense of distance between people can occur. With this, mental health issues are a huge deal in the deaf community, with 2 times as many people being deaf are faced with mental health issues as well. These issues in communication, it creates distance from society, and society puts pressures on them as well to learn how to lip read or to get hearing aids or a cochlear implant. This isolation that they also face and loneliness, this can cause depression and anxiety as well as their daily pressures. They also face a lot of stigma and prejudice, not just from outside society, but within the deaf community as well, as those that were not deaf until later in life can sometimes be pushed away, or those that are just hard of hearing are often pushed away as well. There are extra needs that they often face: education and interpreters. These extra needs can be pressuring and be looked down upon by society as well. The deaf culture choices, this is a big thing as well. While those that are proud to be deaf, some are often wanting to learn to listen and to hear things, so they get cochlear implants, which is a device that wires the brain so that a deaf person can hear. It's very expensive, And then there's hearing aids too for hard of hearing. These choices can sometimes isolate themselves from the rest of the deaf community, and it can make them feel not a part of the hearing world and not a part of their deaf world as well. Sign language is very important to understand before treating a patient that uses it. Signing is not a direct translation from English to hand signs. It is its very own language of different grammar and unique geographically, just as you might think of someone's accent. Each person has their own dialect and way of communicating through their hands. Signing is more than just the hand signals as well. Expressions are extremely important to express the intent, and there is a lot of cultural importance behind signing. For those that cannot sign or can only do ESL versus ASL, there's a lot of things that you need to know before you can treat a deaf patient. Art therapy can really help the deaf and hard of hearing. This is perfect for those who cannot or do not feel comfortable verbalizing. This is a completely non-verbal way of communicating, which is great for those that do not feel comfortable with it. Deaf people often seek creative outlets, and art is an often comfortable option to express themselves. While this might not always be the case for every deaf person, this nonverbal way of communicating is great to express. Deaf people, when they sign, it is not like English. It is not, I will go to this house. It is, their translation would be more like, the red house I will go to. So they often set scenes for themselves when they're signing, and this is really great for art therapy as well, as they can often set scenes for their trauma or their expression of oneself. This art therapy, it can also resolve feelings of worthlessness, it can normalize their environment and create a positive self-image. And with their depression and anxiety that many of them face, art therapy can help with that as well. A wide variety of supplies can be used in art therapy for the deaf, the most common being drawing or painting, but this wide variety gives a sense of self-worth to children and people, because they get to care for these materials, and this wide variety gives them options. So the more options of supplies, the better for this population, as it gives them options which they often do not have in their real world. And choosing one's material can show a lot of what they are thinking about. Things to keep in mind when in therapy with the deaf. You should never assume anything. Some are deaf, some are hard of hearing, some can sign really well, some cannot, some are born with deaf parents, most are not. There is such a wide variety, and this can cause a lot of stress in a deaf or hard of hearing person's life. So to be patient and understanding with their differences can mean the world. Now realize that they cannot communicate and create at the same time. With deaf or hard of hearing, they cannot sign while they paint, for example. So breaking their creative process to talk can be frustrating for them and can break up their creativeness. in the process, so be careful in doing that. Some deaf may be wary of doing art because they were not really given many options as kids or growing up, and the culture feels that if you are to do art, you are like an artist. So, to be aware that some may be wary of going towards art, don't push it. Also, do not interrupt. Don't interrupt when they're signing. Don't interrupt when they're trying to communicate or when they're creating their artwork. It is very important, and they can be very easily frustrated by interruptions. And like I had mentioned before, deaf often set scenes when they are describing things in sign. So setting the scene is really important in their art as well. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and hope you all have a wonderful day.